There seems to be an endless supply of stress, of worry, of panic, of chaos. It seems like the anxiety epidemic that has been coming on over the last 5 or so years is just reaching a pinnacle in the last 8 months or so, doesn't it? Kyle, in his lesson on Wednesday night, talked about how, it feels like the devil is winning in 2020. And of course, we know that Christ overcame the world, that the victory is in Jesus, and that the devil isn't going to win, right? We've read the end of the story, but man, it sure feels that way, doesn't it? And it's very easy, especially right now, to get caught up in the chaos in the world surrounding us and all of these things going on. It can have your head spinning. It can have your finger scrolling. It can have a lot of involuntary responses go on. But generally when faced with these scenarios, people respond in a few general different ways. Some people, I'm probably one of these people, but some people, they're all about do, right? I've got to do something. I need a project. I don't care if it's a dumb project. I need a project. I need to put in a couple extra hours at work. I need to figure out someone to go spend some time with. I need something to do, right? Some other people have the complete opposite response. I need to do nothing. I need a break. I need to calm down, right? Some people probably most people have some melding of the two responses, or maybe some third that I wasn't wise enough to think of. But regardless, I think all of us can agree we see the chaos in our world today, and oftentimes we don't have the healthiest response to it. But I would argue today that not necessarily argue, I would reason today that, that was from class, I would reason today that the Bible is the best response to these situations. And so I want to look at, the Bible talks about this in several different places, but specifically I want to look at Psalm chapter 46 tonight. Psalm chapter 46. So if you will get turned over there, we're going to go through this psalm, the 46th psalm. What we're going to do is we're going to kind of read through this, get an idea of what the psalmist is trying to tell us. Then we're going to have a couple of observations of what this psalm is saying, and then we will have a few applications at the end. And it's been my prayer that some of this will hit some of you where you needed it tonight. As is always my prayer, you may not get everything, but if you get one thing out of God's word tonight, it's been well worth our time. So, Psalms chapter 46, let's go ahead and begin reading in verse 1. It says, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of her, she shall not be moved. God will help her when morning dawns, the nations rage, the kingdoms totter. He utters his voice, the earth melts. The Lord of hosts is with us, the God of Jacob is our fortress. Come, behold the works of the Lord, how he has brought desolation on the earth. He makes wars cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the chariots with fire. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Psalm chapter 46. There are so many things in this psalm. I heard recently that the Psalms are described as Jewish meditation literature. That's kind of a fancy way of saying things you need to think on. But Jewish meditation literature, it's literature, right? Writings written by Jewish authors in a Jewish cultural context. And it's the kind of writing, meditation literature, that you need to chew on and read through slowly and think on. And the more you think on it, the more you will understand from it. And so I want to go back through this and read it a little bit slower. Verse 1 says that God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. This may have read as a cruel joke at times in Israel's history. Don't you think? It says a very present help in trouble. There had to be times in Israel's history when it did not feel like God was very present, didn't it? I mean, you think back, I mean, we could just come up with just like three really quick stories, right? Babylon, Assyria, and Egypt. That it didn't really feel like God was very present in their times of trouble. And yet this is what the psalm is telling us. It says, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. I believe that applies for us today, even though it may not feel that way. Verse 2 says, therefore we will not fear, though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling. Now we have really intense images of natural disasters. We will not fear though the earth gives way, right? Though the earth is breaking, it's giving way. Though the mountains be moved into the heart. If something so catastrophic happened that the mountain was moved into the heart of the sea, I mean, that would have to be a pretty catastrophic event. I imagine the mountain wouldn't be the only thing falling into the heart of the sea. Though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling. I don't know exactly what the authors had in mind here as far as natural disasters, whether it was hurricanes or tsunamis or earthquakes or what exactly they had in mind. But are there not natural troubles in our world today? I just think of a conversation I had recently with Alex, and he was telling me about some of the wildfires that were taking place and how many people were having to evacuate their homes because of these wildfires. Earthquakes happen, I think it's daily. Earthquakes are taking place, though they're not all as damaging as some. There are some incredibly damaging earthquakes that have taken place just in the last 10 years. You think about hurricanes. It seems like it wasn't that long ago, but do you remember Hurricane Harvey? I mean, that just did a number on the city of Houston. Or Hurricane Katrina that happened within the last 15 years. The Bible talks a lot about other natural disasters such as disease or famines. I mean, you've read that in the Bible, haven't you? Where it says, and disease came, or in a time of famine came. I don't, personally, it just didn't hit home with me, all right? We live in America. We have a lot of food and pretty good hospitals. But I think after the last 8 months, we can all identify a little bit closer with disease and famine, can't we? I mean, that hits a little bit closer to home in the time that we're in right now. A disease taking over what feels like taking over the world, and famine. It may not have been a food famine, but there was a toilet paper famine. I mean, there are things we want or need that it seems like we don't have, is my point there. Sorry for the joke. But, this is a very vivid picture that God is our refuge in the face of these natural disasters. Verse 2 and 3 talk about natural disasters. Continue reading. Let's look at verse 4. It says, there is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God will help her when morning dawns. I think this is a beautiful image of just how powerful God is. The couple of verses right before this, the main thing that was causing turmoil in the earth was the sea, right? It talks about the sea, the mountain being moved into the heart of the sea, the waters roar and foam, and mountains trembling at the swelling of the sea. It seems as though the ocean or the sea is a pretty dangerous thing in these two verses. And then the very next verse, it flips this idea on its head, and it describes a river whose streams make glad the city of God. This isn't a picture of chaos. This is a picture of life. This is a picture of a river that gives life to the city of God. Showing, I believe, the point here is to show that God can take these things that cause us so much stress and turmoil and fear and turn those into something that can bring forth and sustain life, which is a beautiful image that the psalmist gives us here. You think back at that, in this context, a river, I mean, that was where civilization was. You can't hardly say the word river without thinking of the Nile River. And you guys know, I think it's like 10 yards off of the bank of the Nile is desert. but on the Nile River is the lushest, greenest grass you could think of. I mean, that's the idea here. There is a river flowing through the city of God that is giving them life and sustaining them. Verse 6 says, the nations rage, the kingdoms totter. He utters his voice, the earth melts. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. And just a couple verses down, in verse 9, he says, he makes wars cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow. He shatters the spear. He burns the chariots with fire. I believe what is being described here is political turmoil. Of course, the political turmoil that they're dealing with are nations and kingdoms raging against each other. Wars. I mean, we're talking actual, spear to shield wars that the images are using here, that the psalmist is using as images here. He talks about nations raging, kingdoms. I think I like the word totter. Right? He's kind of belittling their little fight. It's kind of like when a parent says that their kids are bickering. Well, no. If you ask the kid, they're in a real fight. It's a real fight. But if you ask the parent, the kids are just kind of bickering, right? But this is the idea. He says the nations are raging and the kingdoms, they totter. He utters his voice and the earth melts. Again, I think, when we frame it as political unrest, that really hits home, doesn't it? If we say, well, in a time of war, yeah, I think we have an idea of what that looks like and how hard that can be. But when we say political unrest, I mean, that's exactly what we're dealing with today, isn't it? You think about, and you just think about our political culture right now, snapshot right now. We have an ever-present media, I mean, literally several different channels with 24-hour news coverage that are all pushing us into one camp or the other. It doesn't matter which one you like the best. They're all pushing us in a direction, okay? Then we have, in between their news coverage, we have these political ads. Have you guys taken a second to just watch them honestly for a second? I mean, these are the worst things I've ever seen in my life, right? These political ads that are just bashing the other opponent. All they're doing is telling you how awful this person is. They're just villainizing opposing viewpoints, right? That's all they're doing because they want your vote. And the easiest way to do that is blow the other people's candle out. And we have that in between our news coverage trying to force us into a different camp. This time of year is kind of like it's kind of a joke, but it's kind of like a passive-aggressive civil war, isn't it? It's like no one's going to say we're fighting, but there's a lot of fighting, right? I mean, we call it a debate, but it's more of an argument, I mean, back in medieval times, they probably would have called it a joust. That's more of what they would have done back then. Listen, our political climate is polarizing and combative everywhere you look. Everywhere you look. And yet the Bible says that God is our refuge and that his voice causes the earth to melt. In spite of these things, the answer to this, the only time God speaks in this psalm is verse 10. And he says, "Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth." So the answer to all of this stuff that's going on, this psalm addresses that God is present. It addresses natural disasters and turmoil that's causing pain in the earth. It addresses wars and political unrest that's causing stress and problems for the people on earth. And its answer, the only time God speaks, he says, stop it. Be still and know that I am God. Take a second. I just want you to see how counterintuitive this is, okay? We're talking about in the middle of war and political. Imagine Paul Revere riding through the town yelling, "The British are coming, the British are coming," and someone saying, "Shh, God is in control." Like immediately, I guarantee you, half of you at least went, "Well, that's dumb. He was warning them about a war to come, right? That was important. He needed," like that's what my mind did. As soon as I said that, I was like, yeah, but he needed to do that. That's how counterintuitive what is told to us the answer to this is. The answer to all of these things is a God who is our refuge, who is ever present, who is with us, and all he's asking us to do is be still know that I am God, because I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. It's a beautiful psalm. The more you can sit down, and like I said, it's meditation literature, so the longer you can chew on it, the better it gets. But I want to make three quick observations from this psalm that I think are important, that definitely apply from the psalm. The first one is that trouble will strike. You notice verse 1 says, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Right? That doesn't say that God keeps trouble away from our door, does it? It doesn't say that God, if you follow God, you'll never get caught in a thunderstorm or a hurricane or it doesn't say that. It says God is present in those times and that he is our refuge in those times. Right? Trouble will come, which is very similar. Immediately, the verse that comes to my mind is John chapter 16. A verse I'm sure we know really well. Some of us may even already have quoted it in our minds, but John chapter 16 and verse 33. Jesus is speaking, and he says, I have said these things to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world, you will have tribulation. That's a full sentence right there. You notice there's a period before and a period after. In the world, you will have tribulation. But take heart, I have overcome the world. Listen, it's not about, I think I've used this example before, but I knew a kid who, he was a bull rider. He had a t-shirt on. It said, not if, but when and how bad, talking about how dangerous it was to be a bull rider. It's not about if you get kicked off and hurt. It's when and how bad is the break. In this world, it's really not about if we encounter trials. We will. Jesus all but promised it to us right here. It's about when and how we respond. Will we choose to be still and know that God is with us? Secondly, I believe this psalm shows us that God is enough. God is our refuge and strength. The God of Jacob is our fortress. The God of Jacob is our fortress. The Lord of hosts is with us. This psalm teaches us that in the midst of these troubles, in the midst of these difficult times, stress, anxiety, all those fun words that we hate, God's there and he's enough. It doesn't say that God is there and so you need to do this. In fact, it says the opposite. It says God is there, so be still and know that. Be still and know that God is there because he is enough. It reminds me of Psalm chapter 23, which, I don't know what a better way to translate it is. It's not as poetic, and none of our songs read this way. But Courtney and I were talking about this earlier today. When you read, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, I, growing up, was very confused by that. We're not supposed to want God? I was always so confused. But no, of course, we know that's not what the psalmist is saying here. Psalm chapter 23 says, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall want for nothing. I shall need nothing if he is my shepherd. Right? He leads me beside quiet waters. He leads me to lie down in green pastures. I'm taken care of. I don't want for anything more than what I have. God is enough. And the third observation I believe from this psalm that we can take away is that God is in charge. Just look at a couple of the ways that the psalmist describes God's power in these 11 short verses. Verse 6 says, the nations rage, the kingdoms totter. He utters his voice and the earth melts, right? He didn't even have to yell, okay? He utters his voice and the earth melts. Image that comes to my mind immediately is in the cartoon, when the boy goes and talks to his crush, and all she has to do is smile at him and he just melts, right? Melts onto the, she has so much influence over him, right? This is the way that God is in his influence on the world, or his power over the world is described. He utters his voice and the earth melts. Then you look down a little bit further and verse 8 says, come, behold the works of the Lord, how he has brought desolation on the earth. He makes wars to cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow, he shatters the spear, he burns the chariots with fire. It doesn't matter what we've got, right? It doesn't matter if it's bow or long range or short range, or if you even have a chariot. God is more powerful than any of the things that we can muster up. He is in charge. So 3 quick observations. Trouble will strike. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when and how we respond. Secondly, God is enough in these times of trouble. And thirdly, we need to remember that he is always in charge. Just his uttering of his voice causes the earth to melt. I want to give you 3 applications because we've already established this. The answer, the only 3 lines in this psalm that are spoken by God. You notice the voice shifts, and then 3 lines here are spoken by God, and he says, "Be still and know that I am God." Okay, if the answer is to be still, we could just go home, right? We all know what be still means. But why do we have such a hard time doing it? Well, I'm just gonna take the excuses off the table and try and practice this myself this week as well. Hope you understand. Anytime I preach, I got the 3 fingers pointing back at myself as well. But let's take for a second and look at 3 applications of how to be still. If this is what God says the solution is to this turmoil, to the stress, to these natural disasters, to the political, if this is the answer, let's look at how we actually do that. I'm going to give you number 1, and you're never going to find this in the Bible, but it's the words, "Put down your phone," okay? Number 1, put down your phone. The principle obviously is in the scripture, though they didn't have phones back then. But listen, put down your phone because it's not quiet. When you say, "Be still and know that I am God," put down your phone. You're not still when you're on your phone. Of course, when I say put down your phone, I don't just mean your cell phone only. I mean, turn off the TV. Lock your tablet and put it away. Turn off the radio if that's what, how many times you just get in the car and have the radio on because you feel like something needs to be on. Turn off the radio. You don't need that going on in your brain right then. Or if you are, in fact, still reading the newspaper, put the newspaper down as well. I mean, it's media. It's the same thing going into your brain. Whatever it is that is causing you to churn and causing you stress and causing you to worry and put it down. Put it down. First part of being still and knowing that God is putting down the things that are distracting us. It's not quiet, it's not still, and it's certainly not God-focused. You think about the amount of things you see on social media that are real positive and God-centered things. I mean, you even sometimes see real unpositive God-centered things. But man, when that Venn diagram grows real small when you talk about God-centered and very positive. All too often, when we're on our phones, the things we're seeing are negative, are worried, are stress-filled, you see Facebook rants, venting, right? Facebook fights. I heard a guy say, you need to stir the pot every now and then or else it'll burn. I don't know if I agree with that, we just get on Facebook and we see so much more unrest and chaos. I'm picking on Facebook, but all of them, TV, tablet, your news cycle, all this stuff. It causes our minds to spin and to run. Put down your phone. Philippians chapter 4. Philippians chapter 4 shows this principle, I think, the best. Turn over there. Again, a very simple verse, but one we often have trouble with. Verse 8 says, "Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think on these things." Meditate, some versions say, which I really like that translation of it. Have these things in your mind. As you are still and knowing that God is God, think on the good things. Remember the times when he has delivered you. Remember the times when you've looked back and said, he was present in that time of suffering. Whatever is good and noble and honorable and true and above reproach and all of these good words, think on good things. Hebrews chapter 12 is another verse that I think really makes this point. Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 1 says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us." If the objective is to be still and know that God is God, then I would argue that maybe this isn't a sin, although it can be there. Maybe this isn't a sin, but I think it certainly falls into the category of a weight that entangles us. Wouldn't you? I mean, it keeps us from running maybe as hard as we need to. Put down your phone. It's not quiet and it's not generally God-focused. If you're going to be still and know that God is God, number one, put down your phone. Number two, trust God because he's been there before. Have you seen it's kind of a running bit, like the dog, dog's mouth is cleaner than a human's, and then the dog goes and eats something disgusting, like one of those running bits in sitcoms where someone will be trying to fix something or maybe trying to stitch someone up. And what's the person ask who's getting stitched up? Have you ever done this before? Right? Why do you care if they've done it before? Because if someone's done it before, it means they can do it again. Well, here's the deal. We can trust God for a plethora of reasons, but one of those is that he's done it before. He's been here. Ecclesiastes 1 and verse 9 says that there is nothing new under the sun. Political turmoil, been there. Natural disasters, done that. I mean, do we even have to take that much time and bring up these stories in the Bible? You think about the flood. Talk about a natural disaster. It's about as disastrous as it could possibly be. Or talk about Egypt with the political unrest. The Hebrews they weren't in slavery, and then they were put into slavery. Right? God's been there before. He's done that. Think about Babylon coming in and wiping out the nation of Israel, taking them captive. Political unrest. God's been there. He's done that. Or let's go back to Egypt and talk about the natural disaster of the 10 plagues, or maybe that's a supernatural disaster. We can fight over the words if you want to, but I mean, he's been there and he's done that. God has led his people through these things before, and he can certainly do it again. He is our fortress. He is our refuge, and we need to remember to be still and trust God because he's been here before. The third thing I think we need to do that I believe is very clear in Scripture is if we're going to be still and know that God is God, we need to pray often because God knows this is hard. All right, we need to be people who pray often. God understands the challenge that it is to be still, right? Otherwise, he wouldn't have had to specify that we needed to be still. He understands the challenges that we face to be worried and be panicky, right? We all have a propensity to panic, whether we think we do or not. God understands these weaknesses of ours. Hebrews chapter 4 and verse 15 says we don't have a high priest who can't sympathize with our weaknesses, but in all ways was tempted like us, yet without sin. God knows the struggle it is to be human. Isn't that an incredible... let's take a second and think about that sentence again. God understands the struggle that it is to be a human. The difficulties that we face, he gets it because he's been there and he's done that. He's kind of built on each other. Matthew chapter 6 and verse 9. Matthew chapter 6 and verse 9. Jesus says, I wasn't looking for verse 9. Verse 8. No, verse 7. Let's start in verse 7. Jesus is instructing how to pray. He says, when you pray, do not heap up empty phrases as the Gentiles do, for they think that they will be heard for their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him. Not only does he understand the struggle and the difficulty that it is to be human, He knows what we need before we even bring it up to him. But he still wants to hear what we have to bring to him. Amen. Listen, we need to pray often. God knows that this is hard, to be still and to know. In some ways, all of us are the hyperactive kid that got his color changed every day in class, right? In some ways, that's who we all are. We're these people, right? We're God's children who cannot sit still, who cannot stop looking around us. We're similar to Peter as he stepped out onto the water and was distracted by the winds and the waves. But God challenges us, no matter what's going on,